Hello, and welcome to a video to help you with your English GCSE, English Language. This video is looking at English Language Paper 2, and we're focusing on reading. In order to get some use out of this video, you will need this source, Could You Do Your Child's Homework?, which should have this attached as well, 2 letters from Victorian people, a parent writing to his son and vice versa. So this video is looking at question 3, which is looking at how the text uses language. So if you look at the question in detail, you now need to refer only to source B, the letter by Henry written to his father. How does Henry use language to try to influence his father? 12 marks for this question. So use language is important to influence your father. Use language is the question type. This question will always focus on how language is used. To influence his father is the focus of this particular question. So that second part will change depending on the text that they've given you. Now you've essentially done this question before. For paper 1 question 2, you were asked to look at how the writer uses language to create effects, and it was broken down into words and phrases, language features and techniques, and sentence forms. Now you're being asked to do the same thing. It doesn't give you the bullet points, but they're looking for the same things. The mark scheme is exactly the same. The assessment objective, which is what they put together to make the mark scheme, is word for word the same. So please use the same skills. You'll have noticed that there are more marks for this question on paper 2. That's largely because you're looking at the whole text rather than a little slither of 4 or 5 lines. So it's more challenging, but the skills are the same. So what are those skills? Well, you were asked to look for words and phrases. So you'd be looking at lexical choice, which means the choice of a particular word because it's got a meaning that the writer wants to exploit, or connotations the writer wants to exploit. It might be semantic fields, so groups of words which have a related meaning. It'll be things like adjectives, verbs, nouns, adverbs. Not just saying this word, but if you can, saying it's this adjective or it's this adverb that creates the meaning. And looking at pronouns, so words like he, she, it, they, you, those sorts of words. You're also looking at language features, so things like metaphor, simile, the use of sounds, so any onomatopoeia or alliteration or harsh sounds or soft sounds, whether they use particular senses, smell, taste, sound, whether they create patterns with colours, whether they use rhetorical devices, so rhetorical questions, lists, repetition, that kind of thing. You might also look for sentence forms, grammar. So do they use different types of sentence? Do they use questions? Do they use imperatives, which is just the posh way of saying order or command sentences? Are they short, simple sentences sometimes? Are there longer, complex sentences? Do they suggest things are speeding up, slowing down, the writer's perhaps a bit excited or breathless, or there's something shocking going on? They might even use non-sentences, so sentences which are so short they're not actually technically sentences at all. They might use the point of view, so is it written in the first person, I went to the shops, the second person, you went to the shops, or the third person, he, she went to the shops. They might use repetition, they might use parallelism, which is something that's a way of repeating a structure as opposed to just repeating some words. Now, there are sheets you can get from your teacher, which you may already have, which ask you to look at each of these different things in detail and get you to think about examples for them. So there's a sheet for sentence forms, grammar, syntax, one for language features and techniques, and there's also one for words and phrases. So back to the question. How does Henry use language to try to influence his father? So it's a very particular purpose we're looking for. So the first thing you would probably do is look for a technique. Now we might think, well, one of the techniques is he keeps using the second person. In other words, the word you. So give some quotations for that. You will write. You will let me come home. The next thing we would do is analyse how he's trying to influence his father, with this technique, repeatedly using the second person, using the word you. So we might say it establishes his relationship with his father, and that's perhaps to encourage guilt. It's repeated because he keeps emphasizing his responsibility as a father to look after his son. Now, you'll need to quickly read through the whole text to make sense of what we're about to do now, because we're going to look at a sort of model answer for how you might respond to this question and the ways in which you might structure it. So I would press pause and quickly read through this if it's not something that you can remember well. So here is a model answer. So taking what we've just looked at, this is how you might string it together in sentences. Henry makes repeated use of the second person throughout. So the bit in blue is us saying, here is the language technique. You've been asked, what kind of language do they use? What sorts of choices does the writer make in terms of language? And that blue bit is saying, well, one of the choices is he repeatedly used the second person. So now we need to prove it. So the yellow bit is giving us the quotations. In phrases such as, you will write, you will let me come home. So what's left to do? What's left to do is to say what the influence, the likely or intended influence of that language choice is. So this is clearly intended to influence his father by establishing their direct, intimate relationship with a view to creating a sense of guilt or compassion in his father. So now we'll make another point. This is also evident in the repetition of the noun phrase, my dear father. So it's a noun phrase because it's a group of words rather than just the word father. And that bit in blue again is our point. That's the language being used, repetition of a noun phrase. My dear father is a quotation, with the adjective dear emphasizing the feelings of affection on Henry's side, which he hopes will influence his father to be kind in return. Now you can see the pattern. We talk about what kind of language is used, we offer a quote, and then the pink bit, probably the most important bit, is us analysing how that language influences the father. So let's see how this patterns out again. Attempts to influence his father towards kindness can also be seen in Henry's repeated use of Christian lexical choices. So this just means words which are to do with Christianity. So now we quote some. His references to church, if God permit, Christmas, and the simile, we are used more like bears than Christians, and then we're going to talk about them, all attempt to create a moral pressure upon the father to give in. Repeated use of the verb hope also attempts to emotionally affect the father, pressurizing him by implying that he is dashing his son's hopes by ignoring his plea. This links to emotive adjectives. So emotive just means emotional, creating an emotion in the reader, such as sorry and unhappy, alongside verbs which imply responsibility, such as promised, assure, obliged. These perhaps allow Henry to suggest that he is trustworthy and keeps his promises as a respected son, thus implying that his father should reward him. Henry also uses the violent verb, flog, to imply mistreatment from the school and appeal to his father's emotions. This links to the emotive hyperbole. Hyperbole is just a posh word for exaggeration of we may once more meet again alive, and if God permit us to live as long. Both clearly imply that the father might be partly responsible for Henry's death if he does not remove him from the school. Henry emphasizes the importance of action with a semantic field of time. So these are words that connect together to do with time. 2 years, all my life, another year. These again attempt to influence his father with impressions of how painful each moment is for Henry. That's the end of this video. Don't be put off if it's more technical than you can manage at the moment. This is showing you a model answer. You'll get a perfectly good answer without quite as much technical language. but you should always push yourself to do it. They do expect you to know about things like nouns and verbs and emotive language and similes and metaphors and those sorts of things. So if you're looking for the higher mark, you do need to put these in. I hope you found this useful. Bye bye.